Hello, my conquering kings and killer queens. This is the duelist of all time, Big Daddy Janjo here. GOAT format has recently finished the 2023 World Championships. And this is where a sound effect will play. It's been another wild year of GOAT format Yu-Gi-Oh! And really Time Wizard Yu-Gi-Oh! In general, but GOAT format has had a kind of a wild year in regards to a lot of new decks, a lot of new testing, and hasn't just been Chaos Turbo. So what I think happened with the World Championship is rather surprising. So let's take a look at it. The World Championship was rather interesting in some regards. I think the biggest thing we saw from this is the top 32. Now it started in Swiss, but condensed down to top 32, which is still a very abundant amount of players. And I think what we can see here is that Chaos Turbo is not going anywhere. And really, to whose surprise, I mean, Chaos Turbo consistently, on average, is roughly around, let's say, 40% of all topping decks. You got like that, then you got Warrior, then you got some other stuff lying around, Go Control, and other various decks that kind of come in and out. Earlier this year, I've been seeing a lot of Earth decks, the Earth Beat, Earth Aggro. Chaos Control's sort of been taking a back seat. We've been seeing some Burn kind of rise up. The new Thunderclap deck, the Pile, the Chaos Aggro, Flip Warrior. I like to call it the Thunderclap. I think Flip Warrior is the most accurate name when looking at a deck like this, where he has a lot of general Warrior-isms. Such as the heavy trap lineup with like Solemn and Trap Dust Shoot, a fairly small but powerful spell lineup with like Reinforcements of the Army, just with a little more toolboxy cards. Now what's interesting with all the representation from Chaos Turbo deck is that Warrior was kind of supposed to be the counter to that in a lot of ways, right? The original name for the deck was Anti-Meta Warriors, and we didn't really see much. We saw 3 Warrior decks in the top 32, but 21 of the 32 were in fact Chaos Turbo. Now, what were the other ones? So we had 21 Chaos Turbo, we had 3 Warriors, which is a little surprising. Warriors is usually the easy to play, hard to master kind of deck, and if you can play it well, then you can really counter the more expected decks with cards like Mystic Swordsman, Sasuke, Blade Knights, really buff up Warriors. But I think we saw that Earth, which got second by Shifty, sort of played that role in some regard. We only saw one Earth deck in the top 32. It's kind of an interesting one because there is no giant rats, which typically we see in a lot of Earth decks because you can deal into a lot of Earth monsters, mainly Exiled Forest, Injection Fairy Lily, and you know, Mystic Swordsman's here too. And otherwise, you use a lot of these just cards to just beat down your opponent. A lot of like kind of one-for-ones almost. And in a similar regards to the regular Warrior deck, except this one doesn't rely too much on like battle traps and stuff. It's just more on like bam, 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 in a revolving door type of way. So like Goblin Attack Force and Seon, and then you apply pressure with Gigantus. So we saw that. We saw another interesting Earth deck, actually. This one is a more typical build, and this one included the Giant Rats. But we also see Final Attack Orders, which I was kind of thinking about recently, and it's just kind of surprised me to see it here. Because with all the Gravekeeper spies roaming around and stuff like Spirit Reaper, which has really been popular in the last couple months of GOAT format, just having everything in attack mode can be very beneficial to you if you're running a deck like a very aggressive deck, such as Earth Beat, Earth Aggro, with more so when you have Goblin Attack Force, which does have that downside to its effect, because now it's going to be sitting there for good with the 2300. And I think it was a really interesting idea to go with. Unfortunately, did not get to the top cut. And, you know, Shifty, you know, he's a great duelist in his own right. I mean, getting second in a sea of Chaos Turbo is nothing to scoff at either. We saw some other decks too that was kind of interesting in the Swiss. One of which was a Relinquish deck. which I really thought we would see more of, at least a couple more in regards to like this roguish option. But it's really been making waves this past year since that one Italian tournament, and we kind of see like a general look of it. And like it's a good deck in regards to you have Manji that gets out dark cards and they kind of synergize with things. You can use it with Tsukiyomi. There's a lot of neat stuff going for it. I do think the issue is that it's just not Chaos Turbo, right? Turbo just has a lot of its own things with a little better toolkit, whereas Relinquish is a little bit more focused on like the combo and discard opportunity. Which is kind of a problem with Chaos Control as well. It's a little subpar in regards to having two different decks that doesn't really go all in either or. And we kind of saw it too, because we only saw 2 Chaos Control decks in the top 32. Here's one right here, which is actually more of a Chaos Recruiter one. And this is definitely an interesting build of Chaos Recruiter. Only has 2 Tomatoes and 1 Shining Angel. But we definitely see a lot of the popular picks of this current GOAT season with the 2 Spirit Reapers. We have an Asura Priest in the side, which actually saw a good amount of Asura Priests throughout this tournament in the side deck. I guess people were anticipating a little more GOAT control stuff. Maybe something in regards to time, maybe playing slower decks, but didn't really pan out like that. But Spirit Reaper has really shown its use in just being sort of spy adjacent, being a very strong blocking defensive monster, and also having hand rip capabilities if you can apply enough pressure. And the Shining Angel is kind of interesting because the only target it can go into is DD Warrior Lady. Now you have other lights. I mean, the 2 Zaborgs are the main other 2 here, but it's really neat seeing. It's not quite Chaos Control. In regards to, like, it's not running a bunch of scapegoats and stuff. There's 1 scapegoat, 1 meta. But the Recruiter engine is light enough to make it work. And I think that's really interesting. And the other of the Swiss decks I want to cover is the Spice God himself, Alethea 2, and his Petin Turbo deck. A lot of these decks, you kind of look similar with a little spice, but definitely the big spice here is Petin the Dark Clown. I feel like I haven't seen this card in quite a while. It's really weird. it's good for like get out bodies on field, especially if you're running a lot of tribute monsters like Zaborgs, or even to have enough on field to summon this Dark Magician of Chaos to get you just one of many of these power spells, which is like really interesting. I would have loved to see Leafy get a little bit farther, but it is what it is. You know what I mean? And we saw a bunch of other decks. I mean, there was 1 Go Control. We saw Panda Burn. It was kind of falling out of favor for a little bit, but it seems to have picked back up. Chain Energy is in the side deck, which is definitely a choice. I mean, it's good at certain matchups, but generally it's a tried and true burn strategy. So I like seeing different strategies here. I mean, especially consider like last year, was it Chaos Return? Was that Dingo Sig who won that? We have the Thunderclap here. I was kind of briefly talking about earlier. It's really cool to see a newer deck come up in the World Tournament of all thing and get to this far, 9th place. That's very respectable. I've always had the idea of something like this, like in the past, just running, because you have Rhoda, right, which can search out your warrior monsters, and that's just really good. But I've always felt like it was kind of like a Chaos Control thing, where it's not too far in, but you know, in recent testing and stuff, people have really made it work and popularized and actually, you know, made it a competitive deck. There's another one I wanted to mention here, if I can find it. It was AJT BLS's deck, which has kind of a surprise pick. I mean, one, it's 21 monsters, which is kind of a high count. But Berserkerilla is the surprise here, where it's kind of like Zombira. It's just like a big, strong beater, but you can't beat over Spy. But if you're looking for a big beater, it's hard to pass up on this. Obviously, you don't want to run too many in a Chaos deck because it's an Earth attribute. But seeing that something like that in a Chaos Turbo build makes me really interested on how the future of these decks are going to go. Is the Flip Warrior Thunderclap deck going to evolve even more? Are we going to see more Chaos Earth decks potentially? I'm very excited to see how next year's season lines up. We also saw a Reasoning Gate Turbo deck, the one Now, I'm a fan of RGT decks. Still a little bit surprised we even saw one in the top 32. Again, it's a very tried and true strategy. Trap lineup seems to be 3 jars, 1 call. We've seen throughout the months and years, various iterations of like what should be Reasoning Gate, what's optimal, what are the good cards to pick. And they seem to go with like a Toon Cannon Soldier kind of thing. Definitely a heavier emphasis on Chaos. Mainly nothing but just strong power cards and more defensive options with stuff like Scapegoat. But that works too, though. Because you're usually going to at least keep some of them on board. And maybe the heavy siding to Oster Priest hurt that strategy a little bit. But it's cool to see any sort of differentiation between the decks. Again, most of this is Chaos Turbo. And I think that's kind of a problem looking in from the outside. If you're not too familiar with GOAT format, you're going to see, oh, this is just a tier 0 format. And previous World Tournaments, we've seen other strategies come up. Chaos Return I mentioned earlier. We've seen Earth decks kind of pop up before they were like really popular. Really what's just as equally surprising is the rise in Chaos Turbo and the fall in Warrior. I really thought we'd see more Warrior decks, but it is what it is. There was a lot of interesting things in regards to Trap Dust Shoot too, I found. It wasn't a consistent 3 across the board. There was a lot of 2s, there was a lot of 1s, a lot of 3s, a lot of them in side decks. Now, I'm not, top tier duelist. I'm just a duelist of all time, but I do think 2 is like a solid amount, like 2 to 1, and then going game 2, if you're going first, then you definitely want to side into the other ones. But I get, in regards to the 2 mindsets, either you don't want to break into it where it's dead, but you also want to draw into it early game where it's the most live. So I get it. But it's definitely a fun World Championship overall. I kind of wish there was a little more variety, but you still see plenty of spice. You see sort of creature swap appear here and there. I believe Anthony Alvarado did something like that with his kind of interesting deck with a creature swap. To really make use of a lot of the flips after they flip, so you don't need to rely on Tsukiyomi, but you have 2 Tsukiyomis, which is really good on all of these flip monsters. I mean, he's not running 2 of everything, but he's running just enough where he can make things work in his favor. You could even do a combo with like Creature Swap and Tsukiyomi and Nobleman if you really wanted to. But I think the Creature Swap is a really interesting tech, and it's a really good card that I think has not reached its potential whatsoever. Going back to the Thunderclap deck, I mean, we got that Jing Zheng Hu in there, which is wild. A lot of similar style, Hollowed Life Barrier. That was a popular side deck card. A lot of similar combos. See stuff like Zambira, Asura Priest, Jinzo, plus the Call of the Haunted. Stuff like Mind Control, Book of Moon. I mean, even some people cited or had MC in the side deck in preparation for the Chaos Turbo, just because so many things are chainable. But I'm interested to see how it's going to shape up. Even if Chaos Turbo was by far the biggest deck of the World Championships, it did show that other decks can still compete, and also it does not reflect the overall game state of GOAT format, just because there are so much different decks throughout GOAT format's tournaments that win. Like this past tournament, you got Flip Warrior and Warrior first and second. It might just be a World Championship thing. It might just be a this year thing. It's really hard to tell. I guess we'll have to see in the future World Championships. Warrior, GOAT Control, Chaos Control. You know what I mean? Like, it's easy to look at one big tournament and think, oh, this is the meta, this is the whole format, and it really isn't. So let me know what you thought about the World Championships 2023 GOAT format. Do you think this is a sign of things to come? And what would you like to see in the format either get tested or maybe just be played more in general? I'm really excited to see what future decks can arise. We didn't see any Fairies or Cold Wave Monarchs, but who's to say that things won't change? I mean, again, this past year, we've seen popular decks like Earthbeat get more popular, Relinquish Turbo, Thunderclap, so who's to say what the future of GOAT format will hold? But I'm very excited to see what's going on, and let me know any other additional thoughts in the comments, and until I see y'all next time, have a wonderful day.